too much caffeine last night, Tyler?
Last night.
Or this morning? We good, Silas?
You're on, Michael.
All right, so welcome to 1 Million Cups to Daytona Beach, everybody. Come on, look at that. There we go. Any first-time visitors to Million Cups today? Show of hands, first-time visitors. Hey, welcome. Good to see you guys here. Thanks for being here. Let me ground you on who we are and what we do. So 1 Million Cups comes from the Kaufman Foundation out of Kansas City. It's an entrepreneurship meeting that happens all around the country. 175 cities are meeting like we are right now to bring entrepreneurs together. Yeah, I always like to say that there's no bad presentation that comes up here. This is a supported group. Today we have a great speaker, a regular attendee at Million Cups. He's here seeking to share with us what he's doing with his business while at the same time getting feedback from you all. So he's got some questions for you. This event happens every week, put on by volunteers. It's a whole team of volunteers, myself, and if you're an organizer for Million Cups, hands up real quick just so you guys know who's helping put this on. If you're interested in speaking for Million Cups Daytona Beach, and go to the website and apply to present, we'd certainly love to talk to you about getting your story up here. And everybody's got a story to share, so apply to present if you're interested in that. So with that being said, we have Mr. Tom Mondloch from Guiding Light Guardianship Services. He's here to share his story with us and as well seek some feedback. So please help me give it up for Tom.
Well, good morning. Good to be here. Good morning. Here with the Million Cup family, the way I feel about it, and look forward to sharing. I want to acknowledge particularly Sean Donovan from Million Cups, who was really helpful to me in putting this slide presentation together, who was prepared just for this event this morning, and just in general to the Million Cup community. I also want to do a shout out before I get started to Elevate, and I'm sure maybe there'll be something said about Elevate Daytona, but it's a wonderful event, July the 18th, and if you don't know about it, find out about it, because it's a great event to learn, to hear great speakers, and to see even a different format. So I do consider myself a serial entrepreneur, but not in the traditional sense, because most all of the work I have done has been in not-for-profits. So the development that I've been part of has been part of a not-for-profit, typically a senior living community. And more recently, I've been part of a startup in a franchise, which you'll hear more about just briefly. And it's a placement service. And again, there's plenty of structure there. So this is really my first effort at really starting up a business. So a little bit about me, from the Midwest, small town in Minnesota, oldest of 8, married to Bev for 41 years, going on 42. I consider it to be quite amazing. And we have 2.
So does she.
Yeah, no doubt. And then 2 adult children, sons. So most of my career has been in the area of senior living communities, managing senior living communities. And I know, we have in the room today, I know Brookdale Beach West is here, Todd, a long-standing executive, and that's the kind of work, and Tina Carlisle also, who manage these senior living communities. And the ones that I managed were typically about $15 to $20 million budgets, about 200 FTEs, and 300 to 350 residents who were being served. So these were medium-sized businesses, but certainly plenty to manage, and that was the role that I was in executive management, sometimes as the CEO, executive director. But I would contend that aging is relevant to all of us. And so when you look on this continuum, you are somewhere on that continuum today. And I would also contend that this morning, you are at least 1 hour older than you were when you woke up. So the reality is that we are all experiencing the aging phenomenon. Older people are really reinventing what it means to age. They're breaking the stereotypes. They are tackling aging and ageism. And they're a wonderful group of people to be around, by and large, and it can be a lot of fun. As disability develops, what happens is typically families take over as a caregiver. And this is true throughout our country. In fact, over 80% of the care given to older people who have disabilities are given by families or informal care support, family and friends. With Oasis Senior Advisors, which is the placement business, what I do is help people who can't stay at home any longer. And in that side of the business, what I'm doing is finding a match for them, a senior living match that would enable them to receive the care that they need. And it is a franchise. These are the people who I spend time with, by and large. People who have disability, they are not able any longer to really care for themselves, and family can no longer care for them. So quite unexpectedly, a second passion entered my life. Our own Paula Morton, who teaches at and heads the Institute for Health Services at Daytona State College. And Paula was teaching a course on guardianship, a 4-hour course. And I took the course for the purpose of getting continuing education credits as a certified senior advisor. And Paula did a great job with the class. And as I was sitting there, I had one of those moments that probably we all have had where you say, you know, I could do this, and I could really like doing this guardianship. So what I learned was that guardianship is really designed for people who are lacking decision-making capacity. And that's a critical element in the concept of guardianship. And we have other concepts around healthcare surrogate, power of attorney, etc. But as you'll learn, it's really a legal definition of lacking capacity. And when that capacity is diminished, even to the point where someone can no longer make many or any decisions for themselves, what complicates that typically is family members who don't agree. And maybe you've been part of that in your life. I know those of us in senior living have definitely seen where family members will squabble, and you can imagine what the most likely reason is for that. Money, exactly. And sometimes lots of it. So you've got the issue of family squabbling, and you've got somebody who's not decisional. You also may have no family at all, and that happens. So the intention of guardianship is to really protect that most vulnerable person who is not able to care for themselves and has no one else who can assist them. And again, I'm back to, these are the people who I spend time with as it relates to the concept of guardianship. So it's a little bit hard to read, but professional guardians are regulated by the Department of Elder Affairs. And you get a registration, you get registered to be a guardian in the state of Florida. And the process involves taking a 40-hour course. And as Paula said this morning, Florida has some of the highest standards in requirements for guardians, in part because there are a lot of guardians, because there's a lot of older people who are not decisional, and there are cases where professional guardians have proven unworthy. So these high standards, 40-hour course, and in that course, what I learned is that not only are these regulations related to guardianship, there's also a lot given about how to start up a business in guardianship and how to operate a business in guardianship. So it was very helpful. Of course, the focus is on, well, how does the process work? What is the legal process? So, guardianship is controlled by the court. And so, if somebody were to assert that they are a professional guardian and they have guardianship over someone, if that is true, that has been court ordered. And in the state of Florida, as in all states, there are circuits associated with the court system, and we're in the 7th Circuit, and Judge Margaret Hudson is the judge who oversees a lot of the guardianship. And in Paula's class that I took, there was a little video of Margaret Hudson talking about guardianship, very helpful. So as I was thinking about starting up this business, I contacted Judge Hudson's office and said, hey, could I come by and talk to Judge Hudson? And of course, I had no idea, who she was, what kind of schedule she had, and I was told, yes, there's a 15-minute slot that you can get. You better be there on time, and she's going to see you, in her chambers. So I showed up, had the chance to talk with her. She's amazing, very bright, very capable. And my question was, is there a need for professional guardians in your view? And she would know because she does most all the guardianship, at least in Volusia County. And she said, yes, there is a need. In fact, there is a current professional guardian who has a lot of cases and who may be, in fact, retiring at some point in the not distant future. So that was an important part of my due diligence, was really to understand. So I decided to launch Guiding Light Professional Guardian Services. And in thinking about the name, Guiding Light seemed to be self-explanatory. Helping people who are not decisional and their families. The lighthouse seemed to make sense because here we are, coastal town, iconic lighthouses. There was one other related business who had used a lighthouse, and so I talked to that person about the use of a lighthouse. Even though it wasn't the same one, I thought, well, let's not have any confusion here down the road about the use of that logo. So I got clearance from her. And as it turns out, starting up a guardianship business is a relatively low capital, because creating the logo, creating the name and logo, the business cards, that's an expense. I did sit down with an attorney because one question I had was, well, how do you house this guardianship service so that I'm reasonably protected from a business point of view? And we decided to just drop the guardianship service into my existing LLC. And so it just became another activity of the LLC. And that made it a lot simpler. And there were a number of things that I have certainly learned along the way. The most important thing, though, was that I wanted to operate this business, Guiding Light, as an and to the placement. So I didn't want to see them compete, of course. And this is the theme for this morning, and where I'm looking for support and feedback, is how do you not chase two rabbits? Because when you do, you catch none. And those of you who are in fact serial entrepreneurs know this much better than I do. One of the things I learned about guardianship along the way is that the guardian is paid out of the money from the ward. So if you're wondering, well, how do guardians get paid? Well, there's no reimbursement. You don't bill Medicare. You bill the person that you're serving, which in Florida is referred to as a ward. Not very enlightened as far as I'm concerned, but there you have it. If you need guardianship, you are a ward of the court. And so in that regard, then, of course, there are varying amounts of money that a ward has. But what you commit to when you commit to being a guardian is you serve that ward even if they don't have money. And that can happen along the way. One of the things that I wish I had known when I started, that I learned, is that guardians are typically paid annually. And the reason for that is there's an initial plan that's done, including a physical inventory of all that the ward owns. And when that is done, there's time and expense involved in creating those plans. And those can be presented to the court in a petition. The judge looks at the invoice and says, yes, that looks reasonable, and then the guardian is paid out of the ward's proceeds. However, that is typically done once a year. And as a result, you'll go along for the year supporting the ward, and then you'll come up to the annual plan, where you are going to revisit all the plans for that ward, do another inventory, and then all the accumulated time that you have incurred can be billed then over the course of a year. So you can imagine, if you are doing as I'm doing, I have 2 guardianship cases now, I can look forward to billing next year at this time. So from a sustainability perspective, what I discovered is you probably need about 30 cases that you're working at one time in order to make guardianship really an income source. But what I did determine as I went through the business planning was that I am serving very similar populations. Obviously, these are older people who are vulnerable. I'm also providing a somewhat similar service, placement service, guardianship service. Probably as I've described it, you might be thinking, well, that sounds kind of like the same thing, isn't it? In fact, it's not the same thing, but very close. The dilemma I have faced and am facing is, how do you present yourself in the marketplace when you are a professional guardian and you provide a placement service? On the one hand, the lead sources are even very similar. You've got attorneys who provide referrals. They're the big ones for guardianship and for placement. You've got discharge planners in hospitals, discharge planners in rehab. You've got, in some cases, Brookdale Ormond Beach West may contact me, or Desiree or Tina may say, hey, I've got somebody who I've run across and they're not appropriate for our facility, but maybe you could help them find another one. So those things happen. So the question then is, how to proceed with marketing. What I determined is that West Volusia has more need for professional guardianship than East Volusia. So I decided that I would, in not chasing the 2 rabbits, I would focus on the west side of Volusia for placement, and I would distinctly market the east side of Volusia, Flagler and St. John's, for the placement service. And so I've embarked on that, and in fact have 2 cases, and likely could have many more cases, because I've turned cases down for doing the guardianship. So in fact, the demand to build the business is there. However, what has happened as a result of it, and by the way, one of the motivations for keeping things distinct there are actually 3. One is the perception that I'm self-dealing. Yeah, that Tom, what he does is he gets the guardianships and then he places people. Or he places people and then he wants to become their guardian. The second one, which is really more substantive, is that I would charge for both. Charge for the placement, which the communities pay happily. I receive a placement fee from them. And I also could be a guardian charging the ward for all the time that I've spent in helping them to get placed. Judge Hudson won't have any of that. I don't believe. So I know I can't do that, but the perception, at least in my community, of people that I work with, is what does he do? I mean, this is the risk. What does he do? Does he do guardianship or does he do placement? And is it possible to do both? So this kind of leads me to how can 1 Million Cups help? Because on the one hand, I have a successful placement business that is really paying the bills. On the other hand, I've got a guardianship business that I really thoroughly enjoy. I enjoy both of them. And it doesn't seem like I can easily grow the guardianship business without potentially creating a drag on the placement business. Strategically, I know that I want to work 5 more years. I'm 65, happily, Medicare, yes, love it. I would like to defer on Social Security until 70. I mean, we all would. I mean, that's the maximum, that's a full pay for Social Security. So I see myself having 5 years and to figure out, well, what do I want to do when I grow up as it relates to these next 5 years? And on the one hand, I could easily grow the guardianship. Plenty of demand. I could probably build 15, 20 cases over the next year. However, there's no way for me to continue to do the placement service if I have that level of demand. And I'm very resistant to hiring anyone for several reasons. The main one being, I don't want the responsibility of someone else right now. I don't want to supervise someone, I don't have to direct someone. I have 35 years of directing and leading. I've made my contribution, I feel. On the other hand, it could be a key to this transition, to have some help, to contract out for some help, potentially. So I feel like I'm at a nexus. And you know what's interesting about Million Cups, and what was interesting for me in preparing, is that it really helped me to clarify these questions that I'm posing to you. Because it was kind of there in the background, I was aware of it, but I really was not understanding fully, you know, where I am with the business. So it's very timely for me at this point. The 2 cases I have, I love. I'm getting paid for them, and I can look forward to 2020 to get paid again. However, you know, that's not a sustainable business plan for me in lieu of doing the placement work. So let me just stop there and say thank you. I appreciate your time and attention, and I look forward to your feedback and comments.
Let's give it up for Tom. Right on that mic. So we're going to do Q&A. Hands up if you got a question. Please make sure to introduce yourself, and also make sure you do get to your question. Comments and feedback are okay too.
Good morning, I'm Tina Carter. I am the owner and operator of 2 assisted living facilities, and I also am the owner of a consulting company. I know Tom very well, and I think if you continue to have great integrity and great character, that's going to help grow your business as it has. Also, Tom, you're going to have to, even if you contract them. Even if you contract with an individual that has experience, a lot of people would love to contract, you know, then it doesn't make you solely responsible, but you can teach them your business, but make sure they also have the like characteristics that you have. But I think you're gonna have to put somebody on your shoulders.
Are you saying you're available to me?
No, but I will help you, you know I will.
Hey Tom, Desiree Villanova with the County Healthcare Guide Black Book and a placement company and an assisted living facility. So the 2 rabbits that you're chasing are not 2 rabbits. You're chasing conjoined rabbits. So they're a little slower. So you can catch them. You really can. And you can make this all work for you. You have integrity, you have a fantastic reputation in the healthcare community, which is what you need, and you're already there. All you have to do is grow, and you don't know how to grow. And you and I are kind of in the same position that way, but that's all you have to do, is figure out how to grow.
Thank you.
Bring it on. Sign up as speaker. Q&A's going on.
Good morning, great job, Tom. Tyler LeCompte with Networks Inc. I wanted to talk, I think a minute, you talked about how you don't want to hire somebody, et cetera. In regards to the OASIS and your placement process, how written down is that process? You know, have you ever taken the time to really write down step by step who you are and what you do? And if so, then that technically is kind of a training manual how-to. So you might want to consider, is it possible to either franchise OASIS in a way? I know there's a lot of other placement models, et cetera, but either that or like they talked about, some sort of a 1099 independent agent, like, look, here's how I do it. If it works for you, great. You know, it might give you some skill. I don't know what might be there.
Thank you. And in fact, while OASIS is a franchise, there is no restriction in my contracting to have someone to take on some of the business.
Okay.
And one of the advantages to that, Tyler, could be that I could ultimately groom my replacement.
Mm-hmm.
The question is really how to do that in a way that would be sustainable enough for the person who is kind of coming on. They would need to kind of go from part-time to more part-time to more full-time. However, that could be a key.
Hey Tom, it's Steve Keeler. Great job, by the way. In chasing the rabbits, necessity often dictates that you chase the rabbit with the wallet and nurture the rabbit that's your dream. I want to ask you about your double dipping is the wrong term, but getting income from two related sources is really not. Are you sure it's against the law? Because if you're candid, you're honest, you're believable, you have a great reputation in the community, and I see that conflict as not really being a conflict if you up front divulge your sources of income. People are very comfortable when you address an uncomfortable situation right up front. Could you comment on that?
I think you make a good point, and I don't know for sure. When I asked Judge Hudson, or I commented to Judge Hudson about this double dipping concept, she expressed concern, but did not say technically that it would be illegal. I think in general, the point you make about disclosure is one of the obstacles. You know, as Desiree pointed out, if I'm resistant to growth, it may be that I just see it too complicated to figure out how to disclose my potential conflicts. And it may not be as big of a deal as I think it is in terms of how to package that properly and be able to do both together more successfully.
Questions back?
Yes.
Hey, Tom, Ron Moisekarski with Wise Home Team Realty. I learned a lot today, so thanks for sharing that. It has me thinking right now, so I'll share for about a minute and I'll give you a response. But for instance, I'm in real estate, so there are people that are also looking for an exit strategy to get out of the business and maybe have had clients for years. And so the conversation we always point to is what is the win-win? So for instance, in your position, you're likely to be able to mentor someone. Okay. So you're probably able to mentor somebody in your business and share your knowledge. And if you have the right person that would come under your wing, so to speak, over the next 5 years, you might find a way to share the incoming revenue, knowing that a new person will give you a little more bandwidth, take a few more contracts. You know, if their percentage is enough to keep them in poverty, we should get a little bit better. Chances are, by the time that you're at 70, you go to the retirement piece, you're able to get some passive income for the next several years off the skin of their efforts, so to speak. And so I'm wondering, I know that what we would look at is a sliding scale of what percentage you would receive and they would receive each year up to the point of the tipping point view that you can then reverse it out of the way. you might extend your earning potential a little further in retirement, and also pass along your legacy to somebody who's just as passionate as you. So that's kind of my thought. We see it in real estate a lot, and working on some of those. They're not mergers, they're just win-win opportunities for mutual benefit. So that may apply, it may not.
That's helpful, and it occurs to me that in the guardianship, because it is kind of an incremental business, it may be that someone could add to their plate more easily in doing some of that pinch hitting for me, and then they may be willing to wait the year. Probably not. I would probably need to pay them currently and then reimburse myself at a later time.
Well, you might give them a small percentage now as they learn, but they should also be able to go get new business where you just mentor them. You receive a bigger piece of new business and get a smaller slice of mentor. So some of each.
Good. I like that. Thank you.
Hi, Tom. Great presentation, Paul. Work with Volusia Senior Learning and Daytona State College. I guess I'm thinking if you decide to retire at 70, my question is, at 70, do you want to travel and have nothing to do with either one of these businesses, or do you want to keep a relationship and some income coming in? Because it seems to me the guardianship side of things is harder to terminate than the OASIS side of things. OASIS, you just say, we're not taking any more referrals, and I close the business. The guardianship is more difficult because you've developed a relationship with these people. A lot of what you know about them is not easily transferred to somebody else. And sometimes it's difficult to find another guardian, particularly if some of these guardians are going to accept these patients, these clients, these wards that have no income anymore. They're going to do it pro bono, and the longer you work with them, the longer their revenue stream may disappear. So finding somebody to take over the guardianship side of things, I think is going to be more difficult. But if you want to have some flow of income without doing a lot of work, I think maintaining the guardianship is a better plan after 70.
That's good feedback, and I do imagine continuing the guardianship past 70. I do see that. However, what I might do at 70 is come and take a course from you to figure out how I'm going to reinvent myself to do something else. You seem to be good at that for me. Yes?
Rick, with Mobile Cold, every business, I want to find out the process. I know you're not following people around with walkers and stuff like that, trying to walk up, hey, give them a business card. But how is your lead process? How do you find your leads to do these two businesses? In other words, are you advertising? Is it word of mouth? Is a young lady like down there from, or how?
A good question. It's been largely word of mouth. The franchise part, there's a structure, and they push out on social media information about what I do. And I have done advertising, I've done radio, I've done different things as it relates to the placement side. But by and large, it's a networking. And so I'm in touch with, I see regularly my lead sources at different events. I contact them for follow-up. So I'm really relying largely on building a network of referrals, word of mouth, and doing good work for them, and then following up with them. So whereas the guardianship work really is more, appears to be more of these attorney offices where they have a case and they're contacting me to say, would you be interested in serving as a professional guardian? And in fact, I'm getting a lot more calls to do that than I have time to do right now. So that, and I think that demonstrates the need, particularly in West Volusia, for the guardianship. So in both cases, they're really word of mouth, but to some extent have been different communities of people that I've been promoting.
All right, one follow-up on that is, when you get a guardianship and you don't get paid for a year, which I think is just crazy that you have a year, how do you know on week one or month one what year-end billing is going to look like? Can you get to a year-end billing and say, geez, I worked for $1.12 an hour?
Well, that's a good question. When you start up a guardianship and you do an inventory, you know what the ward's assets are. So you realize what they have and what the potential is for being able to be paid. And typically then you establish an hourly rate. And the judge, it's kind of interesting because, I might say my hourly rate is $100 an hour, and the judge may say, I don't think so. I think you're about at $55 an hour. So I've tried to be conservative with my hourly rate, but I can generally determine my hourly rate and the probable number of hours that I'll be. But things are unknown. Things can happen. We had one of my wards ended up in the hospital. And when that happens, a lot of things occur when it comes to hospitalization and decisions about what happens. So it can be time intensive if somebody had to move to another location. So and only having 2 cases, I don't really know. So I mean, you raise a good question. How can you know what your needs are going to be going forward? So, yes.
Tyler LeCompte, Networks Inc. I had a question in regards, so you're talking about your hourly rates, et cetera. Can you talk about overall costs associated with being a guardian, what those look like on average, and then what kind of a margin you're really starting to realize in between your billable hours and the cost of services? So I think that would help us to understand the potential value, because you mentioned these 2 businesses give you a healthy lifestyle. But that's for one person. So I think the idea is to try and understand what that looks like. So cost of services to margin.
Yeah, well, it's a good question. On the placement side, the company has an expectation of spending about $1,000 a month on advertising.
Okay.
And the placement business, probably brings in, for me, maybe 4 times that in revenue. So
Okay.
that's a reasonable margin. On the guardianship side, it's a little bit hard to tell right now because, like most guardians, I'm spending a lot more time and billing for maybe a fraction of that time.
Okay.
And so I would say I'd be lucky right now to say that I'm breaking even on the guardianship side. However, some of that is just the discipline of knowing, when to step in, when to step back, etc. And most of the guardians that I've talked to end up kind of doing similar, where they feel like they're putting a lot of pro bono time in.
Hey, Tom, Michael Zaharias, great presentation. I'm curious if you've thought about using one brand for both services. Right now you're using 2 brands for 2 different services, but there's a lot of correlation between the 2 and what you're doing. Have you thought about maybe using just Guiding Light and offering both guardianship and placement services under the one brand?
That's a good suggestion, and just as you said it, I realized that there are a number of my colleagues on the Oasis side who have done just that. So they've got a kind of a corporate umbrella, corporate name, and then they provide a range of services underneath that. And I think the franchise is going to expect me to continue to use the Oasis brand. They're not going to. I won't have the luxury of changing that brand, but I can have a super organization that I could market and then identify the 2 services that I'm providing under that. That might make it clearer to people about who I am.
Are you bound to continue with Oasis as a franchisee? Or is there maybe an opportunity to divest from that and leverage your network and your integrity to do it under Tom's name?
Well, it is possible. I have a contract with the franchise owner. I don't own the franchise, so I do have that flexibility. On the other hand, the software that the Oasis provides and the infrastructure is attractive. It's helpful, and it's a differentiator in the market for me. So I would be giving up a lot, I think, to gain that clarity. However, it's an option. Good question. Thank you.
So clarify what you just said. I'm sorry, Tom Jordan, USEO Consulting. What you just said was you're not the franchise owner, so you work for her. So you,
You're not a franchisee, you're a
So-
contract manager for this. Okay.
that certainly makes it a little bit more difficult to change and grow and expand. For the two. The question, I guess the comment I had was, one thing I finally learned was to follow your passion. I hear what your passion is. Is it possible? How difficult is it to scale the guardianship side with additional guardians, whether they're employees or 1099?
I would say over the course of 12 months, it's entirely possible. I would need to recapitalize to sustain that startup because those cases would probably be coming in maybe 2 to 3 a month. And then I've got the kind of the annual cycle of payments. So there's another sort of obstacle for me. But
30 cases.
yeah, once that's there, it's sustainable, I think.
All right, we got one more back here.
So on that last topic, I can shine some light on this because I've worked under franchise in real estate and then went independent. What we found was that we can take for instance, Guiding Light business and put your marketing behind that because that's yours and it's independent. That's the one you'd likely scale because it's yours. When they come into Guiding Light, what we had found was we simply just had disclosure says, hey, we've got a sister business or something to that effect that we can also help you with. It's independent from this, but it's the same people that you're working with. And so by just disclosing it up front, you make that your pipeline to build your business, but you can still offer the services to the franchisee. We had a difficult time with all the disclosures to put them on the same website. So you might have to end up with 2 grocery stores, but make the one you own, the main one, and then refer out to your other franchisee's business. That's what we found.
Well, that's a good suggestion. It makes sense to me as we go down the road. So thank you.
Anybody else questions for Tom? Comments, feedback? What y'all think? Give it up for Tom. You've earned one of these. You can only get that if you speak, or if you win it in the giveaway.
Fantastic.
That's what it is.
Or win one, but
Very good. Thank you.
Great job, Tom. One more time. Give it up for Tom. We're gonna do book giveaway, coffee mug giveaway.
Yeah, I brought one in. This is out of my own private personal collection, which is not extensive. But it is locally, it's a good read I just had, which is the autobiography of Jackie Robinson, our own Jackie Rowe. So it is a heck of a story, especially in these days of the importance of diversity and inclusion in communities. I highly recommend whoever wins this read it. Like I need that. Okay. I don't want to take it. You're just going to take it away again. Yeah. You're just going to take it away. Just going to take it away.
All right, who we got?
Will Klum. Will.
Will.
There he is. There you go, Will. I hope you appreciate that.
All right.
No, it's not signed. It is not signed by Jackie Robinson.
But
And
you can get it signed by Tyler LeCompte right now. He's in the house.
right now, might be signed by the Volusia Public County Library. And no. Christopher,
Man, this guy wins all the time. You better buy a lot
You
of
already
tickets.
have one of these?
You got one already? Or? All right.
I'm calling rigged. I'm calling rigged. There, rigged.
All right.
It's
Any
a-
announcements? Anybody got any announcements? Anything good going
For some
on?
reason.
Events? Anybody had a great success in the last week or month?
Why is it sticking?
Come on, nobody? Tina, come on up. Tell us what you got going on.
Okay, so once a month.
Take this.
I was gonna do my hair like yours this morning too.
Once a month, I'm Tina Carlisle. I'm the owner of Angel Senior Living and Access Senior Resource and Consulting. Everyone that is a healthcare professional in this room is invited to SNAPS. SNAPS stands for Senior Network Advocate Providers. We meet once a month at Carrabba's Restaurant. It's $13 a person. We have a different speaker each time. So if you're a healthcare professional in the room, please come out. We would love to have you.
Great. Thank you, Tina.